industry analyst, and I study the market, and AI and machine learning have always been a part of what I cover throughout my career. It's not new, right? We've had machine learning and AI for a very long time. But the reality is the last 2.5 years, something like that, the market has absolutely exploded. And it's not slowing down, right? There's new things. We'll get into what the things are in a second, but there's new things and new happenings, like literally every day. It's absolutely crazy, and that's the whole point of this webinar, right? It's crazy. So we're going to help you today to make sense of it, right? To understand it. So if you're CEO, or if you are a CEO and you're saying, we need to be doing AI. Okay, so what does that actually mean, right? How do I navigate this landscape? How do I actually make sense of it? So Grant and I are going to be sort of going through this step by step today, and I think it's really practical advice we're going to be giving you. That's my hope, at least. So with that, Grant, let me just sort of put it this way. I know I said there's lots of things, there's lots of stuff going on, but I mean, at one extreme, at the other extreme, how would you sort of define those? I know we're going to break it down in much more detail, but just to give us sort of context for people today.
Yeah, on the two ends of the spectrum, in terms of the different types of tools, platforms, solutions out there, at the highest levels, I think we can say that there are tools, frameworks, software for building custom GenAI solutions. So these are where you want to build an AI solution that's very tailored to your organization or your business process. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have what I would call AI augmented applications and platforms. So these are software in applications and solutions as well, but they, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't have AI embedded in them, and they were focused on something very different. So as you noted, as AI has exploded and really boomed more the last 2 years, we see more and more that almost every software vendor is like an AI vendor now, which adds to the confusion, and a lot of them have very similar messaging. But I think one of the highest level differentiators is just, where did they come from, right? Did they start out as a tool or framework or software specific to build AI solutions, or is it software that that pre-existed, solved another problem, and then now AI is being used to solve that problem better, right, or more effectively? So I think we'll dig into the details of the subcategories, but I think at the highest level, that's where we see most software kind of bifurcated into one of those two main groups.
Yeah, and let me sort of set it up even further. I mean, that's perfect sort of context there. The reality is everything is labeled AI now, right? Whether it is or not, that's the truth. And actually, I'm not going to name names, right? But I have seen software demos where there's no machine learning and AI, but it's labeled that, right? So, I mean, it really is quite extreme. But I guess in a sense, we're in this sort of world where if you agree with this, that maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, to your point, you went out and you bought something to do this job. That's how it was, right? But we're moving into a world now where you go out and you buy something, but then you do something more on top, right? You're expanding it, you're leveraging AI. So that the whole enterprise software landscape is changing. It's literally changing. And I think it's incredibly difficult for us for anybody, frankly, to truly navigate it. And I know the content we've got to share today is a fantastic sort of step to break this down into understandable chunks, if I can put it that way, right? And to differentiate the extremes we talked about, the AI augmented business apps, right? From the frameworks, and essentially build it yourself at the other end. So with that, let's just sort of move on a little bit here, but I think it's still worth just talking a bit more about the landscape we're in, because we use that term landscape, but we don't even know if there's a mountain here or a lake over there, right? It's a very broad term, right? But basically, we've got and Grant, you're the real expert here. I think I know what I'm talking about, but you're the real deep dive expert here. But we've got things like model wars. We've got bots and chat applications which apparently can do everything. Right? They can do everything. They solve every problem that's ever been encountered. And this is what, like 6-7 months old now. Everything's now an agent. Right? We're in an agentic. They weren't before, strangely enough, but they suddenly are agents. Everything's agentic. So maybe we could just break that down a little bit. That sort of, so we can understand at a high level at least.
Yeah. So I think what you're pointing out here, Alan, is that one challenge is just that there's a ton of tools and software, and everyone's and everything's AI now, and a lot of similar messaging is going on. But then on top of that, there's also kind of other underlying themes. For example, like some bigger organizations driving the narrative. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there. As an AI software vendor, when I meet new clients, a lot of it is getting through what they know and what they don't know, or what conceptions they have about AI that may be correct or incorrect. So, for example, you mentioned model wars. One example that I hear all the time is everybody assumes, there's just hyper focus on models. So everybody assumes that you need to go out and you need to start out by building and training a custom model. And it couldn't be further from the truth. But there are lots of organizations out there that are saying that's what you need to do. Step 1, pick a model. Step 2, train your custom model. Step 3, build your AI infrastructure. And then only after you do all those things can you actually start to build maybe a solution that has some type of business value behind it. You're just creating the underpinning. And a lot of this was true some years ago when the focus was more on predictive AI. With predictive AI, you need to train models for sure. But now with generative AI is a different class of artificial intelligence. In generative AI, these models are pre-trained. So we call them foundation models. We call them LLMs or large language models. I know you've talked quite a bit in the past about things like SLMs or small language models as well, right? But the bottom line is that they're pre-trained. And from our perspective is the very last thing you do is fine tune a generative model. You don't want to start off doing that because it's a lot of time and effort. And in most cases, these foundation models with the right data context and the right prompt can give you the result that you need without any custom model training. So like
right, but is it also fair to say that we're in total agreement here, obviously, but the key thing is there that maybe you saying about things being oversold, some of those foundation models, they can do everything or they claim to do everything, but is that actually the right fit for your organization? Is there a different approach? Is there a different structure that is, because that's sort of the promise of these models. Hey, you only need me.
Right. It's another misconception of there is no one size fits all model, period. I very much believe, and my colleagues very much believe that you got to pick the right model for the job. So when I say, you don't necessarily need to train or fine tune a custom model, that's assuming that you have access to different models that excel at different types of tasks. For example, one might be better at decision making. Another one might be better at code generation or code analysis. Another one might be better at creative aspects. Generating images, for example. So it really depends on what you want to do, and let the business case, let the use case drive what models you use, and if and when you need to go ahead and fine tune a model.
So I know we're just about to sort of dive into the details here and make sense of this, but maybe a good segue to that is about terminology, right? We've just said small language models, large language models, generative AI, agents, agentic AI. is it? I think I'll be very bold here. I'll say ignore the labels. Understand what the product actually does, right? Because everything is being. It feels like everything is being mislabeled at the moment. So those labels are.
Yeah, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of mislabeling. I'm fully with you that the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get into this more, but yeah, you have to evaluate the software. You have to look at it, but let it be business driven. Let it be use case driven. That's the right starting point. Not let's build a model, let's build some infrastructure, and then we'll figure out what to do. It should always be business led.
100%. I mean, maybe that is actually sort of our jumping point to sort of getting into explaining and doing sort of some clear definitions on what we're actually talking about here, because what we've outlined, which I think is actually really important. If you're confused, if you're listening to this or you're watching this webinar and you're confused, that's okay. Everybody else is. Right. Yes. So that's what we're here for, to try and make some sense of this. And we're going to sort of go through different software categories essentially now. Yeah, we'll sort of move on to that side of things, right? Because I think we can sort of essentially build some solid categories here so people can actually understand the differences. Yeah.
Yep.
So this might be a time for us to then sort of say, right, that there's a couple of things here, right? We've got four major groups here, essentially, would we say, of AI structures to go through. We can bring up we've got a PDF, we've got a sort of graphic here that we can share, which sort of looks a bit scary when you first see it, but as Grant's going to explain here, and we'll go through it, it really does help simplify things a lot, I believe.
Yeah, and I think maybe just a primer before we jump. Alan, one thing just to note about here too is that this is not comprehensive of every vendor out there, of every software vendor, right? Yes. For kind of this discussion, we've included a handful of vendors with some of the more recognizable names in each category, but there's many more vendors in every category here. And then I should also mention that there are some things that I would consider just table stakes, and they're not called out as a standalone category. So, for example, all software in my mind has to address security, right? We're not calling out like specific solutions that only address security, or solutions need to be able to manage governance and changes. Sometimes that's called out as a totally different category. In this case, governance is included in many of the software that's in this marketscape here. But like we were talking about earlier, I think the biggest groups to differentiate are the groups on the left and on the right side of this diagram. So maybe we can start with the groups on the right side, because I think the packaged applications and solutions with AI features, right? Things that have been augmented with AI. I think that's certainly an easier starting point, because some of those tools, most people are more familiar with those tools on the right than they are with the tools on the left.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the big names that you will if you are in enterprise IT, if you're using business applications, this is usually, I would say, this is pretty much your starting point, right? And these are also the people who've been waving the banner very, very vigorously this past year, right? So if we take, I mean, we won't go through all of these individually, obviously, but let's take a couple that are well known. So Salesforce, for example, right? I mean, is one of the best known brands out there. So Salesforce essentially rebranded itself last year as using the term agent, right? So instead of Dreamforce event now, it's essentially Agent Force. And they claim to be, and I believe them, by the way, I'm not being snarky about it, but they claim to be developing, literally tens of thousands of agents on their customer base. I think the important thing to note here is, though, that with something like Salesforce, if you're using, say, their CRM functionality, which they're best known for, they do have lots of other things. But if we take CRM, this is not replacing your CRM. This is just a fundamental point here, right? Your Salesforce stays, your Salesforce CRM stays there. To Grant's point before, you're augmenting what's already there. So a working example, and again, I think Salesforce is a great example here, is that if you're sort of measuring how many call deflections, if that's your metric for success, right? An agent may well be deployed to provide a better customer service interaction, and your number of calls that go through to a human drops, right? That's a practical business application. Good for them, right? That's a practical business application. Is it AI? Yes, sort of. But really, it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things. AI plays a role within it, and we can move on to the other categories in a second. But I think Salesforce being a really good example here. So generative AI in this context, what's its actual value? Well, the value may be when a customer asks a question, the answer isn't in one place. The answer is in 3 or 4 different places, and the agent can pull that together and summarize it very neatly and keep a customer happy. So that's actually a really solid business case, right? But now that's just labeled as an agent or agentic AI. Actually, it's Salesforce, as was, and we're augmenting and improving one element of its work. Does that make sense? But I think that's a good place. And you could say the same for just about any of these, right? A lot of the time, where they're using this, I would argue most of the time, actually, it's really the summarization capabilities of generative AI. That's probably the most common AI activity, if I can put it that way. It's not predictive analytics. It's not those kind of things. It's really the ability to summarize snippets of information into one nugget that meets a business need. Beyond that, there's not a lot. That is the focus today.
Yeah, and what there is exactly what's offered or exposed by that package vendor, right? So whether you're looking at this, anything in that applications and solutions with AI features box, even in the sub boxes, the subgroupings, those were all software categories, that predated the generative AI boom. Right, so business application platforms, automation platforms, data platforms, and all of these have now been augmented with AI. And again, we're just calling out Salesforce because I think people are the most familiar with Salesforce, and I can speak to that when I used to work for Salesforce, and I was the advisor for their biggest customer, so I know Salesforce pretty deeply as well. And Salesforce is great, but its core focus is sales, service, and marketing. In terms of the AI features, like you talked about, the data needs to be in the Salesforce platform. So if you're a full Salesforce shop and you're living and breathing in Salesforce, having those native features is a low effort, and certainly makes sense. There's an audience for that. But if you're like a lot of organizations that has a very complex or heterogeneous landscape with many different types of applications and tools, it might be harder to say, hey, well, we can only do AI when we're working in Salesforce, and we can only do the checklist of things that Salesforce has exposed in their platform to be able to natively use AI in their platform. And if it's not one of those things in the checklist, then you're out of luck. You got to go build something custom. So I think the net of it is you're ultimately up to what the software vendor brings into the package and what they think is going to be valuable for their software, and it's such a big audience that you're going to get lots of generic tools, and I think the one thing that is limiting is that you're not going to get deeply differentiated AI experiences. Because you're going to be limited within the levers and the knobs that the vendor offers you. So, for example, we actually did a report with CMS Wire at the end of last year, and one of the questions that we asked in our survey of 400 senior IT professionals at enterprise companies was, what were the biggest challenges with commercial off-the-shelf applications, specifically around governing AI with commercial off-the-shelf applications. And only 12% of the people that have these package applications and using AI saying, hey, I don't have any challenges governing this type of application. Almost half of all the respondents said for all of these categories, I'm challenged to ensure compliance with external regulations. I have limited control over models that are exposed and used in these applications. I have difficulty monitoring and auditing the outputs of the AI. And it's certainly not centralized. And a lot of times you lose the transparency too, because a lot of these packages are black box. So certainly there are challenges and limitations when you go down that path. And I'm
right. But the thing is here that's where a lot of people will start, right? And I think it's fair to say also that these are early days, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things we as analysts we get told about quite a lot is, there's going to be armies of AI agents, right? And army is probably the right word for it, and they're all going to interact with one another. Well, technically that's feasible. Is it actually practical to do? Well, again, these are really early days, and to sort of your point, when you get into the GenAI platforms and you get into your specific models and your frameworks and stuff, there's the challenge here, and I'll pass this to you, but the challenge for me is, where do you even start, right? So you're starting here, you're playing around, Salesforce is building this little agent. That's great. That's great. That's a nice quick win. Okay, I get it.
Right.
But where do I go from there? And to your point, if everybody can do this, it's not much of a differentiator if everybody's doing the same thing.
Yeah, and it's a big leap going from the right side of this diagram to the left side of the diagram. So you're absolutely right. I don't mean to make it sound like you don't want to use any native features, AI features in your apps. Like, it's very low friction. It's very easy to enable. I guess my point there is that it's just not going to be the end all be all, and you're going to outgrow it in most cases. As adoption continues, and as you kind of look at creating a custom GenAI solution, which is more about what the left side of the diagram is about, you're going to be looking at these different types of AI tools and frameworks to build it. And to start, you're going to have to figure out, well, what are all the pieces that you need? And talking with clients that have built their own GenAI applications and are working on agents, generally they don't have the full picture starting out. So even on the left side, as they're building something custom, there's an evolution there. They start with one use case, one custom use case, and they have one set of infrastructure for that one solution. Maybe they go on to another use case. Now they need different pieces, and they're putting together different tools to create another solution. And I think that's another part of the evolution that we'll see happen, where people will build more of these custom GenAI solutions, but then that doesn't scale, because they're all kind of these bespoke snowflakes of infrastructure to support kind of the different end solutions. And it's just not, that's where you're going to look for well, how do I build something and make it repeatable, right? So I don't have to blow my entire IT budget on one use case when you have maybe 100 use cases that you need to get through. So that said, maybe we should jump in a little bit more into the AI tools and frameworks here. When you start getting into a custom GenAI solution, I think starting in the top left with the model studios, I think that's actually a place where a lot of people start. And the PDF just disappeared. Let's see if we can get that back for a moment. But there we go. The model studios is where a lot of people start, because there's a UI. You can type a prompt. You can see a result. It's a great place to experiment, right? So you see a lot of experimentation happening in these model studios. But then, you can write a prompt. But then, once you have a few prompts or a few solutions, you realize, hey, I need to manage all these prompts, right? You can do the experimentation in the model studios, but how do I manage my prompts in a production environment? How do I manage the changes to those prompts over time, because essentially the prompts are your business rules or your business logic, right? That you're sending to these AI models. And then, hey, these AI models are giving us outputs. Can I trust the output? Then you might be looking at an evaluation tool, right? Are these models giving me the appropriate outputs that I expect? Is there what they call model drift, meaning like maybe it gives you the output at first, but then it changes over time? Maybe new models come out and you need to evaluate some new models because the old one's getting old and the new one's, shiny and better and cheaper and faster. And then you need to be able to observe this stuff, right? If you get something in production, you need observability. So again, on the left side with the Model Studio, you're just experimenting. Once you have something in production, you need to be able to run and maintain it. You need to know who did what, when they did it, like what did the model respond with? Was it the right answer? How long did it take? There's a lot of information that you want to observe. And then on top of that, that's just for like maybe one AI task. If you want to create these agents that you're talking about, you're going to have to orchestrate both a combination of agentic tasks with traditional programmatic tasks. Agents aren't just an AI model. They're a combination of programming structure to kind of give it the direction of what it is. Because the AI models aren't good at every task, right? There's still things that we need to do programmatically and that are more efficient and better done that way. So I know I kind of went through that pretty quick, but I think that's just
that's really good. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing here is that we go from that. We'll do this little thing in for customer service task, right? That's one thing. That's still good. But as soon as we move into the world of sort of starting to build and maintain, to your point, right, and observe, really we're in a world of and this phrase comes actually from my colleague, not me, but you're essentially orchestrating a whole bunch of services, and that can get out of hand very, very, very fast. And to your point, new models are coming out every single day at a pace, right? So you need that environment, right, to basically pull it all together.
Yeah, literally. And so maybe just to hit on like the very bottom, the inference providers, these are like the hyperscalers and the people that are hosting and running models. So, just in the last week, we have things like Google's Gemini 2 becoming a public release. We have Claude's new 3.5, which is like their decisioning model. So, that's where we're seeing new models introduced, is in that very bottom band of the inference provider. That's where, if you're not going to host your own model, and you want your model to just run in the cloud, then you're going to be using one of these inference providers. And if you're maturing and you have lots of GenAI solutions, you're probably going to be using multiple inference providers, because even within one provider, you're going to be limited to the models that they offer there, right? So for example, Watson X models are only available on Watson X. Google Gemini models are only available on Vertex. GPT is only available on OpenAI. So there's still, these proprietary models where you can only get them in one place. So I very much think that as adoption continues and enterprises mature, we're going to see them having multiple providers. And I know we need to move on.
Maybe we do need to move on. But I think what we covered there, in a sense, is very quickly just to say is that, it's one of the age-old questions: do you build versus do you buy? We're moving to a world where actually it's a bit of both. It's not such a clear-cut thing anymore, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is a little fuzzy, because here on the left, we see a combination of both things you buy and things that you use to build and things that you build on top of the things that you buy. Right. So it really is a fuzzy line. Like some of those, that middle band on the left, where we say things like vector databases and LLM frameworks, those are definitely things that you're going to be building more with than the row above. You're going to be building a little less. You're going to be buying a little bit more and building a little less. But in all cases, unless it's open source software and then you're just building on top of that, there's generally going to be some type of combination of both buying and building.
Yeah, and when we were sort of comparing it really to sort of the early days of cloud computing, right? So, now just open up your laptop and connect to the cloud. Isn't how magical is that, right? But back in the day when we were talking about cloud computing, we were talking about people spinning up their own private clouds. It was we're at that sort of same. Would you agree? We're on that similar journey.
Yes.
I'm actually not sure if we are on the same journey, but it seems like it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Like when the cloud became really popular, everybody's like, "Hey, I'm going to build my own private cloud." And that happened for a little while. And I feel like it's the same way with, "Hey, I'm going to build my generative AI infrastructure." It seems okay at first, but then once you realize that you have to do it many times over, and you have to scale it, and you have to maintain it, and that's not the core of your business, then you start to look to outsource it, right? Is there something that I can buy or subscribe to where I don't need to have to build and maintain all this stuff?
Yeah, because you just end up drowning in complexity and cost, right? Yes. And at the moment, but at the same time, at this moment, and probably for the next few years, we are still in a sort of experimentation stage, right? So maybe that's not so bad, right? Because we're learning, right? I mean, we understand how the technology works, but we're not really quite at that point to know really what the outcomes truly are when those products that we build are tested out in the real world. Right? Yeah. So very simple use case again with the customer service, but when we start getting into more complex activities, we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to learn what's worth the effort and what isn't, right? And let's be practical about it. AI budgets, IT budgets, right? IT budgets are not going to double in the next year, sadly, for anybody in IT. That's not happening, right? Golden rule of thumb, IT budgets go up about 8% a year, right? So the money to do this AI stuff is going to come from somewhere else. So there's a lot to figure out here. We're all still in that sort of scratching around phase, right?
I agree. Yeah. We're still in very early days. There's a lot to still learn and evolve from. And but just given the explosion and a lot of the confusion and kind of the common messaging where it's hard to differentiate between all this stuff, I think it's important to, at least when you are looking at vendors, right, to be able to understand, hey, where do they fit, right? And kind of what is their software going to bring to me? What's the benefits that I get, and what else am I going to have to stitch together along with it to be able to grow over time? How is it going? And that's what I mean by scale, is how is it going to grow over time? How is it going to grow with the business? How is it going to grow with additional Gen AI or AI needs? And I think that's one of the most important first questions to ask any software, AI software vendor, to try to understand kind of where do they fit in this map? Because generally, they're going to fit somewhere in here.
Claim they are. They will claim that they do everything, right? That's sort of the nature of software sales. But you're absolutely right. So I think this infographic is really useful for people, very helpful for people actually. And I don't know, but maybe we've talked about this. Maybe this is sort of round about the time we should show a sort of demo of what we're talking about and how things work. So we should get to that and actually put that into practice. But when we've sort of been covering here largely how we break this down, that there isn't one thing called AI. That's not an existing, that doesn't make any kind of sense. We had a message come through that we really shouldn't be using the term AI at all, which I actually personally agree with, because it's very misleading. Very, very complex world, but people are actually, that's the takeaway here. People are doing this, right? People are actually rolling their sleeves up, building things, implementing things, buying things. It's not just hype.
Yes.
That there's reality here. Yeah. I think that's the thing when you just touched on it there. It's like, when you're going out there, you really need to be prepared to ask good questions of anybody who's providing you anything. In the world of AI, you said about what kind of platforms does your model support? Where does this come from? What's its perspective? And I think perspective is not a bad word, right? Because if you are from the structured data world, or you're from the the ERP world or whatever, you have a world perspective. Does it fit with your business needs? Where are you coming from? And again, to your point, there's lots of different approaches here, but so that's great. So we've got a couple of questions. We're sort of obviously coming near the end here. We've got a couple of questions, and I'll throw this one to you, Grant. I mean, we've talked a lot today about complexity, right? And we don't want anybody leaving here thinking that I think this is a word you've used. It's cobble everything together, right? Because this is looking very, very daunting. So, I mean, what is the answer to that one? There's got to be an easier way.
Yeah, and there is, and it's changing, it's evolving. I think we're seeing more and more vendors taking on a larger role. So even though we had a lot of vendors in one category in that marketscape, we're definitely seeing vendors crossing boundaries and adding more features and capabilities. But I think that the net of it is that you don't have to knit everything together or integrate it all together and create something that's truly bespoke. In my mind, it's reinventing the wheel, right? It's reinventing the cloud, as that analogy that we used before with moving to the cloud initially. At Vertesia, we believe that you should be able to have a single, cohesive, and comprehensive GenAI platform that eliminates all of that complexity, because you don't want to be spending time just building AI infrastructure. You want to be able to spend time on actually building the AI app, or the thing that's going to be facing your end user, facing your employees, the thing that's going to drive the productivity and the efficiency. Because what doesn't do that is building the infrastructure up front. So certainly at Vertesia, we have a platform, and as you just saw in the demo, it covers a lot of the end-to-end nature of creating these solutions, from ideation through the development into the deployment and the operation of a GenAI app or an agent.
Okay, and another question here, which is, I'll sort of paraphrase it a little bit, but we touched on it right at the beginning, I think. But look, my organization has a large ERP system, etc. That's not going away. We might like it, we'd love it to go away. We don't like it very much, but it's not. It's staying in place. I mean, how do I figure this sort of thing into it? Beyond, okay, if it's SAP, then they've got their own thing, right? Where are we at with that? Presumably, this is one of the first questions you should be asking. What can I integrate to my existing apps, or even existing workflows?
Yeah, exactly. So in the demo, that was a purely custom built GenAI application. But it doesn't always have to be custom built. In many cases, it's about augmenting existing applications with AI. So we talked about some of the package applications that are doing that natively. But even if it's not offered by the software vendor, absolutely integrating AI tasks and AI services and agentic workflows is a possibility from most modern software. If software from the last 10 to 20 years, you're probably all set. Maybe if it's like 40-year-old, 40 years old, maybe you're gonna have a problem, like a mainframe or something like that, because there's just integration challenges. But absolutely, that's a perfect reason to use a generative AI platform and infuse AI services into your existing apps, like an ERP.
Okay, and then one final question we've got here is just really about, I mean, so you talked about a sort of unified platform for building within, but for a lot of people, I mean, who aren't really deeply involved in IT or AI development, there is a perception that, this is the world of pure data scientists. And I think that's changing rapidly, right? So, I mean, how do we sort of involve less technical and non-technical? Do they play a role in this at all, I guess is the question.
Yeah.
Other than being end users or, yeah.
So I very much believe that they should play a role. If you're building something custom and you're down in the nuts and the bolts, certainly that's going to be determined by, do you build that functionality that exposes and can involve business users, as an example. But that's where, like, we see from Vertesia, that's the benefit of a low-code platform for building generative AI solutions, is that you can have a place to go where even business users or less technical users can understand and have insight into the operations of these AI tasks and these agentic workflows. So absolutely, as tools evolve more and more, and we see, getting the business and your end users, I should say your end stakeholders more involved, there's a lot of value in that. It shouldn't just be an IT
and I think that's a good point. Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, the number one reason for IT projects failing is not involving, right, the stakeholders and the end users, right? And there is a fear, I think, sometimes that we get caught up in how amazing the new technology is. Let's get it out there. Let's get it working, right? But to your point, yes, but let's involve them as early as possible, right? I think that's great. I think we've covered a lot today. I know there's a lot more to cover. I know there's some documents you can download here. I know, obviously, Grant and the team there will be happy to answer more questions. But I think with that, we'll sort of take a deep breath, call it a day.